Hey guys, this is your High Fist here with another juicy video. We're going to try something different today. I am going to try to give you guys an introduction to the laws of war, but using Malazan examples, right? So I will try to run you through the basics of what you might cover in the first lecture of a course on the laws of war, and we will be using case studies from the 10 big books to sort of illuminate each principle, right? So there are three fundamental concepts, pillars, when it comes to the laws of war. Everything else is just fluff. So even though you might find entire libraries with books just discussing humanitarian law and the nuances in various things, it ultimately boils down to just three principles, right? If you know these three principles, then you are pretty much an expert on international law. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. So the three are proportionality, necessity, and distinction, right? So the first is distinction, as in whatever action you take on the battlefield, it must be capable of distinguishing between civilians and combatants, and even between your side and the adversarial side. An example of this being breached in the Malazan series, off the top of my head, would be Teshren unleashing the demons at the Siege of Pale in Gardens of the Moon. I remember there was this interview that Claudia did with Erickson. I think it was the first one or the second one, I can't remember, where she sort of even asks Erickson why Rake immediately focuses a lot of his attention on the demons that Teshren's unleashed. And Erickson said, because they're nothing but trouble, they're indiscriminate, right? And in sort of by today's definition of how we conceptualize war, that would be the definition of an indiscriminate weapon. So this is why in today's day and age, gas based attacks, right, like chemical weapons and all that, are banned under international law, because they are indiscriminate. They cannot distinguish, number one, between civilians and combatants, and number two, they can't even distinguish between your troops and the enemy's troops. So that's distinction. The second is proportionality. This principle essentially means that whatever action you take on a battlefield has to be proportionate to the strategic objective you are trying to fulfill, you are trying to achieve, right? So if your objective is to catch a single terrorist, you can't just drop a nuclear bomb on a city where you know the terrorist is hiding. That would completely breach proportionality, because it's completely, the use of force, the scale of force in this case is completely disproportionate to the strategic objective that you are trying to achieve. An example for this, an exaggerated example for this, I suppose, would be what the mages did during the Kalorian Empire to bring down the cripple god. The actual first event, a lot of people tend to forget, was the reason the cripple god is even here, the reason we even have the 10 big books, is because Calor was such an evil tyrant, right? And it was, I mean, there are some who've argued that he wasn't actually evil, that he was a good king. I've not really gone into that. When I do my Calor video, I will get into that. But the point is, bringing down the cripple god, which was like bringing down an asteroid, which destroyed an entire continent. Essentially, I mean, the world itself was never the same again after the fall of the cripple god. I would say this, you could say, violates the principle of proportionality, because bringing down this cosmic entity into this world, this cosmic entity capable of destroying magic, poisoning everything, right, in order to take down a human tyrant, immortal as he may be, or may no, this was even before Calor was sort of cursed with immortality, right? So I think it breaches proportionality. Tell me what you think in the comments. And finally, we have necessity, as in whatever use of force you display on a battlefield, the violence that you resort to on a battlefield, must have been necessary to achieve some kind of strategic purpose. So, gratuitous violence, torturing someone for fun, right? Things like that would be war crimes because they violate the principle of necessity. And here again, I'm sure most of us can think of Malazan examples, right? How many sadistic soldiers do we see? So many. We even see sadistic tyrants. Reyes, for example, took pleasure in sort of enslaving and mentally torturing his victims. I'm sure if you sort of chronicled the wars that Reyes has fought, they would be full of war crimes, right? It would be a chronicle of war crimes, and almost all of them would be perhaps breaching the principle of necessity, because I don't think Reyes, I mean, he did have a lot of ambition, and he did want to conquer and all that, but I'm sure he also did a lot of things that weren't necessary, that he just did for fun. Displays of violence in armed conflict for fun, those are what breach necessity. So that's one example I can think of. Outside of these three principles, so these are the three fundamental principles. If you violate any three of these, then you have committed a war crime, right? That's the basics of the laws of war. Outside of that, let's look at a couple of other issues that would be considered war crimes, which fall into this, but which warrant more sort of individual discussions as well. One common issue that you see when people discuss the laws of war is the use of child soldiers. Many terrorist insurgent organizations and armed criminal gangs in continents like Africa and Asia typically resort to a lot of these things, the use of children as soldiers. And what better example for something like this than Shadow Throne and Cotillion? We all remember the Icarium, Quickben, Trull, Edur, uh, Imas, whatever, fight for that throne. And remember whom Shadow Throne and Cotillion were using. They were using children as soldiers, right? You could argue that there was something off with most of those children, right? Panic, for example, isn't really anybody's, or shouldn't and wouldn't really be anybody's version of a regular kid, right? Let's face it, but they're still kids. They're still children. And there's a reason why Cotillion later has his hands buried in his face. I wasn't a big fan of that scene, to be honest, because the recruitment of child soldiers is a pretty serious issue. And the country that I live in has certainly suffered from that problem a lot. There was a 30-year insurgency here, and the terrorist organization did use child soldiers on a pretty mass and rampant level. And if the leader of that insurgent group had just put his head in his hands and cried, I don't think I would have forgiven him, right? I don't think that just regret absolves a person from a practice like the use of child soldiers. But anyway, that's the example for you guys, Cotillion and Shadow Throne. With child soldiers, there's another very sort of prominent thing that's often discussed, which is human shields, right? As in the weaponization of civilians. This can be as shields, and it can also be in other forms, as we see with the Focral Assail. The Focral Assail's use of mind control, if you notice, is very different from the Jagu tyrant use of mind control. Reyes used to play with people's minds, and he used to enslave people mentally for fun, right? He liked it. He liked that control. He got a kick out of it, right? He got the sort of he there was certainly pleasure involved, sadistic pleasure involved in that. The Focral Assail, on the other hand, they enjoy no sort of pleasure from controlling people. To them, it's just a means to an end. To them, humans, are just tools to be controlled. And in that sense, the entire Focral army that was made up of mind-controlled civilians, right? Remember, their army in the Crippled God wasn't so vast and big because it was a professional army. It was so vast, and it was so vast because it was a civilian army. It was an entire kingdom that was controlled by the purebloods to serve as soldiers, and they could fight with a certain passion that even unmind controlled professional soldiers couldn't. So that's a clear example of the weaponization of civilians. What else? What else can we touch on? Oh, maiming and mutilation. Okay, now I've thought of a fun example. So remember that cool scene where Bryce mutilates Roulard? He kind of just chops him up in just the right way to lay Roulard flat to where Roulard can't move, but he's alive as well. That would be a war crime in by today's time, because that is, you are deliberately mutilating someone. As in, you could argue that it breaches the principle of necessity. Of course, you could say that Roulard's immortal, therefore it was necessary for Bryce to do that. But this is the whole nature of law, right? There will always be two sides to a coin, and you could just keep going in circles. But if you think of what Bryce did, he mutilated Roulard, and he was just going to leave him there, maimed. There's a reason why flattening bullets are banned under international law. There were these types of bullets. If some of you might have heard them, right? So as soon as they hit your body, they bloom into a metal flower, and this is done to increase the pain. This is done to mutilate people. It's done to kind of leave lasting injuries, which is considered a crime in international law, right? Deliberately mutilating someone, deliberately sort of wanting to leave a lasting scar on someone that serves no strategic purpose. As I was saying, here you could say that it's good, but just roll with my analogy, right? Imagine Roulard's plight once Bryce had done that. If things didn't work out the way he wanted them to, Roulard would have been unable to move, and he would have been unable to die as well, and he would have just been trapped for eternity, the way that the dragon, the Otataral dragon, is trapped for eternity wherever it goes. What else could we count as sort of things we need to discuss? Genocide, right? We see genocide being committed on a pretty frequent basis in the 10 big books. The most famous and pertinent example will certainly, I guess, be the Aimas taking on the Jagut, right? So genocide is the deliberate extermination of a particular group. It can be on the basis of ethnicity, religion, right, profession even, but it's the deliberate targeting of a coherent, cohesive group for total extermination. And in this case, as you would all know, the sort of the Tilan Aimas war against the Jagut is clearly that they don't care if you're a mother with children, they don't care if you've helped them capture the tyrants that came before them, right? The Aimas don't care. The Aimas just want to destroy the Jagut, kill them, wipe them off the face of the planet, wipe them off from existence. And this would be a clear example of genocide. Genocide has to be distinguished from mass murder. Mass murder is the mass murder of a group, but it's not really targeting one particular community. It's indiscriminate, right? The deliberate killing of a large group without really having some kind of categorical motive would be mass murder. And an example of that would be Calor destroying his entire empire before Draconis, Kurul, and Nightchill arrive, right? He's just killed his entire continent. We don't really find out how he did it. Did he do it through magical means, alchemical means, or just the old-fashioned way? We have no idea. But he didn't target a particular community. He didn't target a specific group. It was just indiscriminate murder, and he killed every single person on that entire continent, which was where his kingdom was. So that would be mass murder, which is to be distinguished from what the Tilan Aimas do to the Jagut, which is genocide. So yeah, so those are the basic things that I wanted to touch on, right? Distinction, proportionality, necessity, child soldiers, human shields, right? Yeah, mutilation, genocide, mass murder. I hope you guys found that interesting. I know this was a bit of a sort of random and maybe even a weird video, but I hope the point kind of came across, and I hope that you guys learned something about the laws of war. Thank you, and see you guys next time.